Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Conspire a Theory. I have with me JB Caine of the am I going to get this podcast wrong? The Unfreakingly Believable Podcast, is that correct?
Very close. Unfreaking believable.
Unfreaking believable.
Yes.
That is unfreaking believable. It's a fresh new one that started out. I believe it's been out only for like about a year or two. Is that right?
We just finished our last podcast for this year, so one year. Yep, we're about to record our anniversary episode for January 11th. We're pretty excited.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's a really good show. Yourself, it's a collection of 3 authors. You bring on a special guest. You discuss a spooky experience and get into a little bit about the background of your guests that you have on. It's a really pleasant listen. I'm picking up on it, and I'm looking through your back catalog, and that there should be enough there to keep me busy until you start up again for the new year. So congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we have a variety of types of episodes. They're all sort of pivotal moments in somebody's life, some of which might be supernatural, some of which are dumb luck, some of which are moments of courage. So we try to get a bit of a smattering of different types of stories in there. The 3 of us all are deeply sort of entrenched in the paranormal fantasy cryptid world, so we always enjoy those when they come on, so we always have a good bunch of those, but we have some other stuff on there too, so a little bit for everybody.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You seem to be quite the triple threat as far as the paranormal goes, from a podcaster, an author, and a bit of an experiencer yourself. So tell us a little bit about your foray into authorship.
Well, I was actually an English teacher for 30 years in Hillsborough County in Florida. And I've always had an interest in the supernatural. I've had experiences pretty much my entire adult life. And so it seemed like a natural fit that that's the kind of thing that I would also be interested in writing about, because since I had such a breadth of experiences, I think it informs the way that I write scenes that involve the paranormal. And I also have a deep love of folklore, so I like to include a lot of folklore in my writing. But anyway, in 2019, I was starting to think about retirement. And so I thought if I wanted to launch a writing career, that was good timing, because I knew I'd be retiring in just a few years and I could get things rolling. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. So that was very conducive to being a writer, because you just basically had to sit at home anyway. So that all worked out well. But yeah, I've been a published novelist since 2019. And I think I have 7 books out now. Yeah, 7. And a handful of short stories as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed a lot of them are in the young adult market. Is that correct? You have a series that hits in the young adult market, I believe?
Yeah, I do have a YA paranormal series that's known as the Arcana Trilogy. It is a tarot-based trilogy, very sort of young people coming into their power, very witchy vibes. And so that one is definitely in the YA territory. I also have a high fantasy series called the Iron Shield Shadow series, which is written with adult characters, but it is definitely YA friendly. So think kind of like the Dragonlance books from back in the day, or something along those lines, where they're written with adult characters and they are written for adults to enjoy, but they are friendly, where if you had a 12-year-old who was a strong reader to pick it up, you'd feel okay about that. So that's I guess because I taught high school for so long, I like making sure that my books are at least accessible to that market, even if that's not the total target. The exception would be my horror. So far, my horror writing has been more adult oriented, I would say.
Yeah, you'll definitely find yourself in good company here. The past guests, those that have been authors, have been young adult streamed from, I think it's Miracle Austin, who's a young adult writer, local here to Texas, and Jack Connor of the Atomic Sea series. A lot of you'll find yourself in good company in this neck of the woods.
Well, excellent. Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, YA is a category that they use kind of to put it in a bookstore format, but more than half of YA readership is actually adult readers, not the target quote quote target audience. Um, so most I think probably more than half of my readers are probably in their 30s and 40s. So we'll take all comers. Anybody who wants to read my stuff, come on down.
That sounds good. The Now, I guess we'll get into that later in the podcast.
Sure.
Is your podcasting and book stuff? It's good to lay down the groundwork before we go over it one more time and sink into it a little bit deeper.
Okay.
I had heard you first on, I believe it was Shane Jones'
Oh yeah.
Inquiries
Yeah,
show.
that was a fun podcast for sure.
Yeah. And it was a really pleasant episode. I really enjoyed it. You guys got into some of the, aside from the spooky stuff, you also discussed some of the high fantasy and also stuff, and that's when I got hooked in, and it's like, oh, I have to reach out and get you on my show as soon as possible. I believe it was the day of that I listened to the episode. I immediately got your contact information, bought several of your books over Kindle,
Yeah,
and
you popped up really quick in my
yeah,
feed for sure.
I just had to snag my claws into you right away. The because it was just we'll definitely retread those topics, but right
Okay.
now, just for the introduction, just to get people a little bit of background, what was it initially in your personal paranormal experience that you had discussed first that brought you upon the scene to begin with? What was it that you saw? Did you see an alien? Did Bigfoot come and get you? Did the Loch Ness monster steal 350 out of your purse?
Well, I know
What?
that you mentioned that you had listened to our podcast episode with Ashley, who we have affectionately
Mhm.
dubbed the Nessie Lady. I have been a deep fan of the Loch Ness monster pretty much most of my life. So there was sort of a big craze in the mid 70s. And I kind of caught on to the tail end of that. So I think I mean, I don't know, maybe second grade, about the time I started really being fascinated with the Loch Ness monster. And of course, that leads you to, Bigfoot, Yeti, and all of the things that come thereafter. So I've always had a fascination with cryptids my whole life, for as long as I can remember. But starting in about, I'd say, high school, I also started noticing that I had a lot of intuitive tendencies, um, kind of more, I guess you would call it empathic at that point, sort of being able to tell if people were saying what they really meant, kind of having a sense for people's emotions, that kind of stuff, and that sort of continued to develop. And about the time I got into college, um, when I was really able to start exploring that kind of stuff on my own, because I was way too busy when living in the house with my parents. Um, but once I kind of had time to myself, I started making friends who were sort of outside the community that I had grown up in. So um, I made friends with some folks who were very interested in the paranormal. I made some friends with some folks who were a local coven of Wiccans, stuff like that, because I wanted to learn from everybody. And so I
Yeah, we used
actually
to call
had
them the weird goth kids. Yeah.
oddly enough, they really weren't very goth. Those were more the vampire loving
Hmm.
crowd at that point. They were much, they were true Wiccans, so very much the nature loving. um, you know, everything that is nature is sacred, folks. So they were incredibly gracious and kind to me, and they taught me a lot. And I learned a lot about sort of my own capabilities and abilities. And one of the things that happened during that time is that the high priestess of the group knew how to do past life regressions. And so
Interesting.
um, yeah, so she actually did one on me, with particular focus. I had a really odd phobia that I had no reason for why I had that phobia. Like, I hadn't had a particular experience or something like that. It was a phobia for a very particular type of knife. Not one that you would typically see in a horror movie or anything like that. It was just very, very specific. So anyway, that was the focus. And there was also some uh, weird dynamics that were inexplicable between my mother and my brother and me. So that was also part of it. Anyway, so after that experience, which was very illuminating, and again, they were just absolutely wonderful. That kind of opened a door, and all of a sudden, even though I was no longer in a state of hypnosis, which is really just deep, deep, deep relaxation, the door was open, and the things that I had started to experience were, I would say, magnified, and I became a lot more open to learning more about those things, which included clairaudience, so I could hear um, voices from the sort of spirits who are around, more of a sense of presences other than the physical ones, that kind of stuff. So that was really interesting to me, and I spent a lot of time kind of learning about that, and learning about my abilities. I learned how to read tarot during that time. And anyway, so that's just all one big snowball effect, to where some aspect of the paranormal became a part of my everyday life, one way or another. Whether it was intentional or passive, it was just, it's just kind of always there. So when I started, I mean, I've been interested in writing my whole life too, but when I started writing sort of seriously, that seemed like a good treasure trove of places to pull from. And if you
Yeah.
listen to my interview with Shane, I've had a pretty interesting breadth of experiences. I think I told the poltergeist story, the Scotland poltergeist story, I think, on his show, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. For the benefit of the audience, we might have to retread some of those stories, but we'll see
Okay.
what it is that we come up with every now and then. Aside from the spooky stuff, it's like some of the stuff that you're talking about, the feeling of presence, the
Mhm.
clairaudience and stuff like that. I haven't had any personal experiences, probably not comparable to the level that you have, but I've had familiar instances on my own where I can really relate to what you're talking about and get like the sort of an idea of where you're coming from. So I find that definitely interesting. And on the level that you experienced for it, it must have been overwhelming, to have deal with it at that intensity.
Yeah, a little bit. But again, because I was really fortunate to be friends with this community of, and the Wiccans were the ones who kind of like started to kind of help me understand sort of what was happening. And I am what I would call an eclectic spiritual person. So I don't really fall into the category of any one religion. I think there are many paths up the mountain, as it were.
Hmm.
But they were incredibly helpful for helping me understand sort of what was happening, and also helping me to understand how to control my inputs. So when I became a teacher, that was really, really important. And I think I talked about this on Shane's show as well, that one of the things about spirits is that because spirits, for the most part, are just people on a different plane of existence. They tend to, if they're on the earthly plane for any reason, it's usually to watch over someone that they care about, or be involved in the life of someone that they care about. And a lot of times it's someone that they're worried about, which a lot of times happens to be kids. So if you are a teacher and you are a sensitive, um, if you don't know how to kind of filter that out, it's constant. So I was very fortunate that they did teach me sort of how to do that, so that I'm not constantly barraged um, with some of the physical things that happen to me when I'm feeling or communicating, or any of that kind of stuff. So that was super super helpful.
Mm. I could see how the potential for that to be problematic is there, especially when you're full of a classroom of kids.
Oh
They're
yeah.
all going to have tethers of spirituality, stuck into each of them. And I
Hmm.
believe you did recall a story where you pretty much that just about almost got you into some deep trouble.
Yeah, it was a risky one, and generally speaking, I avoided that as a
Hmm.
teacher. There were a few students, mostly it was creative writing students of mine, who knew a little bit about my sort of paranormal proclivities. But for the most part, I sort of kept that isolated. So most kids didn't even know about it. So even if things were happening, um, I didn't really address it. So, they wouldn't necessarily have known what was going on. That one case that I talked about on that show, where a student's grandfather was quite adamant that I was going to deliver a message and that was just how it was going to be.
Hmm.
um, that was an exception. And I think that's maybe only one or two times that it ever happened while I was teaching. Most of the rest of the time, I kind of just filtered it out. So,
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Um, Now, in your teaching background and all this stuff, I'm sure that you covered like a lot of the classics, like the Arthurian legends and stuff like
oh,
this.
sure.
Did any of that? How did that, or was there any pathway from there to what got you into when you did write? Is where how did you stumble into high fantasy?
Well, I actually started reading high fantasy, oh gosh, I'd say probably in the early 80s. I was a huge Piers Anthony fan. So I've read the Incarnations of Immortality series is probably my favorite book series of all time. I've reread it a bunch of times. I mean, the first high fantasy I read was The Hobbit when I was like in fifth grade. So I've always loved the genre. And there was some element of that sort of in my teaching, but at the time where I was teaching, a lot of that wasn't really in the curriculum anymore. There was some mention of Arthurian legend, just for the sake of people understanding references and things like that, and kind of talking about literary illusion and stuff like that. But there was actually a lot more mythology than there was Arthurian stuff. So I did teach the Odyssey for years. So I got
That's
to
a
I
good
get
one.
to work a lot of folklore and mythology in, and that was kind of how I managed to feed my high fantasy addiction while I was teaching, because most curricula are not, let's just say, high fantasy friendly. Um, so
Yeah.
I did manage to weasel a little bit of it in there with maybe a short story here or there, and then folklore and things like that. So that, like I said, that was my fix.
Yeah, I do remember reading over the Odyssey in high school, and one of them that really grabbed me was the tale, the Ballad of Beowulf.
Oh
That
yeah.
was I guess the one of the uh, uh, I guess one of the earliest, you know, uh, action movie chase
Mhm.
scene, car crash type of
Oh, yeah.
whatever's of its genre, and to see it, reimagined in every single, whenever I see any kind of iteration of Beowulf, I gotta pick it up.
Oh, yeah.
It's I think there was even the film adaptations. The one
Mhm.
directed by Robert Zemeckis was fantastic,
Yeah. There was one
and
that
then
came out at one point that was just awful, and I don't it's so bad that I think I watched 15 minutes, I couldn't stand it anymore. Um, but,
wait, I think I know what you're talking about.
yeah,
The
it
one
was in, like, a
with
medieval castle.
Christopher
It was
Lambert.
yeah, it was oh, no, 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 actually,
No,
that one was, let's just say, a little bit lacking, but it wasn't as bad as this other one that I saw. This other one I saw, like I said, I
oh,
couldn't even sit through it.
so
Um,
I missed one.
yeah, it was really bad. I don't recommend because you can't get that time back. But, I love I absolutely love Beowulf. But the thing is, I loved the concept of Beowulf more than some of the text of Beowulf. So,
Mhm.
my daughter studied Beowulf this year 'cause she's a senior in high school, and, I was all excited about it, and then she was like, "Yeah, but the whole end part is just awful." I'm like, "Well, okay, yeah, you're fair. That's fair. The whole end part is pretty, anticlimactic, but the part with Grendel and Grendel's mother, and really Grendel's mother is the best part. But, like, that whole section is really terrific. And I don't know about you, but I have to say that probably my favorite adaptation of that is Michael Crichton's Eaters of the Dead and The 13th Warrior, which is
uh,
the film that was then made of
mm.
it.
I've seen the 13th Warrior.
Mhm.
It was remarkable. It was so engrossing, and
Oh yeah.
it took you there. And
Oh yeah. And I mean, I had read The Eaters of the Dead first. Um so when I saw The 13th Warrior, I kind of already kind of understood what I was walking into, but the way that it was adapted to film, I thought that was one of the most highly underrated
mhm.
films of its type. And
Yeah,
I even
definitely.
read that Omar Sharif was sorry he ever did the movie, and I was like, "Are you kidding me? That was a great movie." Um, and everybody in it was fantastic. I watch it every few years just because it was just so artfully done.
Yeah, I mean, there's just something special about that Northern European centric fantasy folklore that leads it to high adventure that is so engrossing,
Hmm.
and it's just it sticks with you, and hopefully it won't go away for some time. The modern adaptations, as far as putting it into Dungeons and Dragons and others and video games, and right now I kind of feel like we're going through a secondary sort of we're having a reemergence of high fantasy, but
Hmm.
without the drama of the satanic panic trying to drag it down.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm a big fan of Dungeons and Dragons, and have been basically since college. And um, I think that Stranger Things has done a great service to teenagers and college kids everywhere, in terms of introducing them to something that I loved very much at that age and still do. I'm not actively involved in a game right now, but I've got a whole shelf. I've got a whole shelf of D&D stuff, so definitely close to my heart.
I remember having the first edition of the Monster Manual, or I didn't have it. My brother did,
Mhm.
and I would flip through it and go through the artwork work,
Mhm.
and it was just, he was the one who would buy the source books. And
Yeah.
then when he was, at high school and I got home from elementary, before he could come home, I'd sneak into his room and go through his books and just look at the pictures, because that's all I could do.
That's so
uh,
beautifully wholesome, though. Like, you could be sneaking in there looking at his Playboy magazines, but no, you're there for the monster manual. And
uh,
let's just take a moment to appreciate how beautiful that is as a
uh,
concept.
well, he probably hid those better, but I did find those. But the I'm just talking about the source books for right now. And I love with, with media the way that it is now. I mean, there's channels that dedicate themselves to just comparing and contrasting the lore and the between the source books, and it's everything you wanted to know about goblins, everything they never told you about kobolds, and I am so engrossed in that, and
Yeah.
I find it so fascinating, and as from what I understand, when the early Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of those creatures were mythical staples from various cultures. Like there was
Oh,
this
for
one, the
sure.
Rakashan.
Mhm.
I something along that. He's the shape shifting tiger person with the backwards hands.
Mhm.
That is a
Mhm.
sort of jinn like entity that does exist in the Middle East, and it was adapted into a D&D creature. And I'm
Mhm.
sure
I
that
think
there are
actually there
several.
was an
Yeah.
episode of Kolchak, the Night Stalker, that was all about the Rakashan. I think that was one of the very first episodes. If you've never seen Kolchak, definitely pull that one up and enjoy a little binge watch because it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, I have no idea where the hell the beholder came from. If that one was like purely a completely fictional creation, because it's like it's something from completely out of nowhere, from the ethereal, I guess, Cthulian
Mhm.
old one
Yeah.
type of soup
Yeah. I
that
was I was
it's
gonna
sort of
say
its own
it's
thing.
very Lovecraftian.
Yeah.
But also interestingly, there are elements of the beholder that are reminiscent of the biblical description of an archangel
Hmm.
with
Interesting,
its
isn't it?
many eyes and all that sort of thing, um, and all of that. So, I don't. I would love to ask someone who designed it as a creature what their influences were, but yeah, I would say that there's probably some Lovecraft in there, maybe mixed in with some other things too. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That is really interesting. And as I was saying earlier about how I think we're in this high fantasy revival, a
hmm
lot of it I blame is due to video games and a lot of anime too, because the from the overseas we're getting this sort of isekai boom
hmm
of exploring fantasy worlds. There's so many series upon series that are in the set backdrop of a generic gamified high fantasy setting where
hmm
they're dealing with dragons and stuff like this. I had just
yeah,
finished this one series. What was it called? Um, Firin, The Journey's End, about
okay.
this elf that was 1,000 years old, and she had just finished the grand quest that, to kill the demon lord, and they had
hmm
finished that, and it's about her life afterwards in this sort of high fantasy world, trying to it's basically a fun little sort of soppy story, and it's really cute.
Yeah,
And
my
then
daughter, when she was younger, loved The Dragon Prince, which is another one of those that is, um, an anime, but with a very heavily flavored high fantasy, um, vibe, and, there are elves, moon elves in
mm,
particular, um, which are very cool, so
yeah, I think I've heard of that. I'm familiar. It rings a bell. I can't quite place it at the moment. And then there was this other series I had just finished. What's it called? A Goblin Slayer. And that one was a little bit of controversial, but it was it was so engrossing, and it just got down and dirty and garish and all that stuff. And with with your and of course at first I started all that stuff like in the 80s, the late
Mhm,
80s, with this series called Record of Lodoss War, which
mhm,
was sort of an adaptation where it started out as a bunch of people got together, they played a campaign, and then they wrote it down and adapted it to a novel. And
mhm,
then the novel got adapted into a screenplay and stuff like this. And then it was sort of built from that. And it's like one of the even today, it's still one of the most revered high fantasy, epics out there, and I see stuff like that, and it keeps you pulled in, and it keeps you there, and it just sort of it it's hard to try to step out of that world. And with the new I guess revival that we're sort of seeing right now, experiencing right now, that it is sort of interesting that to play into that. And that's why I would like to ask you is like, what with your series about, tell us a bit about, where it is that you tread and how you make your mark in the high fantasy world.
Well, the Iron Shield Shadow series is incredibly close to my heart, and I'll give you a little bit of backstory as to how it came about to start with, since you've actually maybe on purpose, maybe accidentally, made a perfect segue. So when the pandemic hit, I was coaching the debate team, among other things, which I did for 25 years. And so we went to all online school at that point. And my debate captain came to me one day, not obviously physically, but over Zoom, and said, "Hey, look, a bunch of the folks on the team are really having some mental health struggles because of the isolation. And we know that you played D&D in college. Will you run a game for us?" And so I hadn't played in a while, so we had to kind of go back to the beginning for me, because it was there's been a lot of changes since I had played last. So we did sort of a basic starter campaign, and none of them had ever played before. I don't think one of them may have, but so we started playing, and then that core group actually played for 3.5 years together every Sunday, or sometimes if we were on a break, several days a week, that kind of stuff. And different campaigns. And one of the campaigns that we played was a homebrew that was created by Lee Sism and Sam Hamilton, who were two of my former students. And they created a completely different world. So it was D&D flavored, but it wasn't all of the same pantheon and all of that. It was their own original pantheon. So it was such a good campaign, and the characters that we created and played were so rich, and the storyline they created was so good. At the end of it, or actually maybe it wasn't even at the end, I said, "Hey, what would you think about me adapting this into a novel series? And I'll consult you because it's your world, but what would you say with me kind of doing that?" And so Lee and Sam were on board, and so they became co-creators on the covers of the novels. And they, like I said, because they sort of created the universe, and then I did the storycraft part, insofar as if you've ever played a D&D campaign, most of the stuff that happens makes no sense. and it doesn't always follow a nice linear story. So, taking anything out of it that was proprietary D&D stuff, making the storyline make sense, making some rather significant changes to some of the characters, that sort of thing, so that it had a more balanced story. So the Iron Shield Shadow series is actually based on the campaign that Lee and Sam created, which is why I give them co-creator credit on the cover, because without them, the universe wouldn't exist. So all the characters are, well, not all, most of the characters in there are based on characters that we played in the campaign. And the dedication in the books, if you got the physical copies, the names that are mentioned in the dedication were the players who just became such an integral part. So when I'm writing those characters, when I'm writing Dalgus, or I'm writing Elia, or I'm writing Echo, I hear the voices of those people who are so beloved to me as humans. And so when I finally do finish that series, because it will be a 6-book series by the time it's done, when I finally do finish that series, I'm going to miss those characters terribly, because they are very much alive for me in the memories of those folks at the time.
That's interesting. So in a way, you sort of, like the record of Lodoss War, you sort of did your own, adaptation of a
Mm-hmm.
campaign, which then became the backbone for that story that you did. That's fascinating.
Exactly. And so that's why I said you made the perfect segue without even meaning to.
That is, yeah. Sometimes, what is it? The history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, type of thing. Uh,
I like that.
yeah,
I might steal that.
that's fun. The let's see, one of the things when it comes to this of these stories and these characters and all this stuff, the thing is with Dungeons and Dragons now, I mean, it may not be the same game that our forefathers have played,
Mm-hmm.
but there's so much in I'm trying to think, modules,
Mm-hmm.
supplementary material,
Oh yeah.
homebrew campaigns.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a very
it
rich thing to
yeah.
pull from. It's almost its own lexicon of folklore and mythology.
Yeah, you can adapt like whatever it is that you want. And I remember I saw this, like I'll get like because I watch so many lore videos on YouTube and all this stuff. And when I'm browsing my social media, I'll get ads for homebrew campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was, how to adapt. Um, it was a supplement for having a dragon in your adventurer party.
Well, hello, Dolgus. It was actually probably more of a dinosaur than a dragon in many ways. Part dragon, part goose, part human. A few other things thrown in there for flavor.
Yeah. Now this is starting to sound like a Dungeon Motion episode. That's the popular one now, where it's about a party of adventurers, and it's actually the culinary side of Dungeons and Dragons, where
Okay.
they're adapting the monsters into side dishes.
Oh, that's so dark.
Well, yeah, I mean it is in a way, but it's like where you they have one where like you turn the slimes into patty cakes by drying them out and stuff like this, and they become like a paste that you cook with and stuff like
I
this.
have
And
this image of Eye of the Beholder soup, where it's just a bowl of soup with just this beholder eye floating in it.
yeah.
It's so dark.
uh, yeah, it's fun, and it is fun seeing these other recognizable creatures pop up in other. I think it was just to nerd out for a second, Goblin Slayer. There
Mm-hmm.
was this episode where they actually ran into a beholder, but they couldn't call it a beholder for legal reasons, so they referred to it as the unknown creature, as a
Mm-hmm.
creature from the unknown, because there was a dimensional gate, which of course led to the licensed Dungeons and Dragons universe, and
That's
a
clever. I
beholder
like it.
came through, and so this like that unknown creature that we cannot name, the
Right.
unnameable creature, and then they figure out a tactic on how to kill it by, I think they filled the room with flour, and then they ignited the flour or something like that to blind it, and
Nice.
and and, and even just to tie back into the cryptic stuff, there was one where they're at an elven village, and then the village gets besieged because the goblins had they somehow had captured and were trying to domesticate Mikilio Bimbe, the dinosaur.
Yeah.
And it's so hilarious because in the elves knew about Makilio Bimbe. And it's funny how the elves, in their elven tongue, they call him straight out Mikilio Bimbe.
Right.
I had no
I just
idea
have
that.
this image of like a almost like a corral, and they're doing Makilio Bembe rides, and he's got like a little harness and like you would with a camel or an elephant.
Mhm. Yeah, and that was cute. It's so funny how Elvish, ancient Elvish, is very similar to Amazonian, Amazonian dialect, but anyways, it's just those little fun things that you get that you're never going to see it anywhere else, but in the realms of high fantasy and stuff like this, and it's so much fun.
Because
The
there's no rules.
Yeah,
As long as you're consistent within your own universe, there's no rules.
yeah, and it seems like everybody's got an itch for it somehow. Because it's like I think it was a past guest, Michael Thompson. I think his first book was a fantasy novel as well, and he had like a bunch of side characters and stories and little stories, and he like rather than write a bunch of little individual books, he just gobbled them all up into accumulated them into one story and put it out that world of the orb.
Hmm.
He's currently running through his current series, which was with the seafaring fishermen.
Hmm.
I can't think of it off the top of my head, but everybody's going to know what I'm talking about. And once he concludes that, he has one more book. Then he's going to revisit that fantasy realm. So I can't wait for that to happen. I again have that book burning in my Kindle right next to yours. So I've got already a backlog of stuff that I need to read when I do get free time. So even in
I can
my
relate. My TBR stack is actually a TBR bookshelf. So that happens when you have lots of friends who are authors. You end up accumulating physical books because you get them from people that you know, and then you kind of, otherwise I buy stuff on Kindle more often than not, but if it's somebody I actually know, I always want a physical copy.
yeah, I I love getting a signed copy from someone, an
Mhm.
official signed copy. It feels special.
Mhm.
But as soon as whatever it is comes out, if there's a Kindle version, I'm buying it because I only have so much bookshelf space.
That's exactly it. And especially if you're only going to read something once, there's no reason to necessarily own the physical copy anymore. Unpopular opinion, I know, for all you book dragons out there or book goblins, I apologize. But there's only so much space that you have, and so um, favorite series that I have. So ones that I have know that I'm going to read more than once, or that I just want to be able to look at and remember having read it, or maybe reread sections, whatever. Those I like to have the physical copies. Um, but a lot of fiction books, unless it's somebody that I know, I'll lean toward Kindle. If it's somebody that I know, I will definitely buy a physical copy, especially if we're at a book show or a con or something like that. I'll get an autographed copy, and then it gets a place of honor on the shelf. Because I do love to support other writers. I think that it's really important, and that's one of the things I love about the author community is they tend to be very inclined to support each other, and don't really see each other as competition for the most part. They just,
How
they feel there's room for everybody.
how do you feel about the secondary market, like used books?
I think that's great because I'm a big believer in whatever gets people reading is a good thing. So we have a couple of used bookstores around here, and they oftentimes they also have a local author shelf. So I have some of my books in their in their stash as well. There's if you live in sort of the Central Florida area in Dade City, there's the Book Shack, and then um, in Tarpon Springs there's a place called the Funk, and they have my books there as well. I have a big show coming up with them that I'm super excited about next week too. So, but I actually love used bookstores. I think they're terrific, and
Mhm.
whether it's because you want to go in and rebuy maybe something that of yours that was damaged. So I mentioned that the Incarnations of Immortality is my favorite series. On rare occasions, I have loaned people copies of one of the books because they wanted to read it. And several times those books have wandered off. And, if not for used bookstores, sometimes I couldn't find those books again. And I think for most authors, I mean, most of us out here are slugging away and we're not really, making a 6-figure income out here. If we're making a 4-figure income, we're happy. So I think it's more for most of us just about getting our books in the hands of readers. And we whether that's through a used bookstore, Amazon, Kindle, public library. I'm a huge, the first time I saw my books on the shelf of a public library, that's when I felt like I made it as a writer. That to me was the realest thing, because that's where my love of reading began. And so, you know, it's all about the stories, man. All about the stories.
Yeah, that I feel the same because I know that there are some that they don't like it because it's like that they don't make a commission off that direct sale, and they get bitter about it. But I'm like, the used market, the secondary market, it opens up to new readers
Absolutely.
because those people, I mean, if they buy a secondhand book and if your work is good enough and strong enough, then they'll buy the first edition from you directly of whatever new or even you know co- other work to complete the series.
Hmm.
I just see that as a plus.
And even if they don't, right? So maybe some people don't spend a lot on books. So
Hmm.
they buy used books because maybe 14.95 for a paperback is a little bit too much to swing, but 2.99 is doable, right? But even if they don't then go out and buy $15 books off Amazon or whatever, they might tell a friend that really enjoyed your book or whatever. But again, ultimately for me as a writer, it makes me happy to know that somebody's read my story. There's very little that most writers love more than hearing from somebody to tell them that they really liked a story that they wrote. Um, I mean, I think that a lot of people feel weird about reaching out to people they don't know to say, "Hey, I read your story and I really liked it." But I'll tell you what, speaking as a writer and speaking for other writers that I know, there's not a lot better in terms of feelings in the whole world, because that's like basically somebody saying they like your child, right? It's really very much the same feeling. So I don't know. Like I said, if it puts books in the hands of readers, I'm all about it, 100%.
That's good to know. It's good to see that other people share that opinion. Um, as far as like your books, are you going to planning on adapting them to audiobook, or have they been adapted to audiobook?
So, interestingly enough, well, doing professional audiobooks, if you're not going to use AI, is fairly expensive. If you're going to try to book proper studio time, hire a voice actor, that kind of stuff, it can get very costly. I have been dabbling with the idea of using my podcasting equipment to narrate if I can get a clean enough sound. Um, was thinking about probably starting with the Iron Shield series. I did actually record as a test the beginning of Iron Shield. And I don't know if he'll listen to this, but Jonathan Arms, who was the original inspiration for Dolgus, is a brilliant voice actor. Unbelievable. Just has the most amazing ability to manipulate his voice and do stuff. And so I've talked to him about the possibility of doing some voice work for me. Um, and I would love to do it. It's just really it's been a matter of time and cost. Um, I
Yeah,
could
completely
theoretically
understandable.
Yeah, I think I theoretically could do it at home, because I do have professional recording equipment, but I do not have a sound booth, so I would have to construct something to deaden outside noise to make sure that the sound is super clean. Some of it I can fix in post, but some of it not so much. So, but I'm very open to it. I want to do it. I think I've been a little intimidated by it, if I'm 100% honest. So, because it is quite an undertaking. I know that I think it's Amazon now has an AI bot you can use to do that, but I can't get my brain around that. To me,
Yeah.
that might be a step too far.
If when it comes to sound dampening stuff, I hear plushies make the best sound dampeners
Mm-hmm.
because
Well,
they're
what I
just
thought
in.
about doing, we actually had him on our show. Dear friend of mine named Daniel Cox, who has done a lot of film work. He's a director and artist of other stripes as well, and he suggested actually going into a like if you have a walk-in closet, just set up your equipment in the closet and put a
Mhm.
blanket over the door. He said you'd be
Yeah.
amazed at how good the sound is if you do
Well,
that,
yeah,
or
yeah,
if you can
because of all
record it in a
the
car. If you can
yeah,
record in a car in a garage, that's actually
yeah,
also really good.
the cars are built with natural sound dampening stuff into
Mm-hmm.
them. All the it's integrated in the design. And with the closets, all the coats in there, especially if they're cotton fabrics and
Mm-hmm.
wool, that
Mm-hmm.
absorbs the sound like it's insulation. It's sound dampening insulation. So
Yeah.
that's like that's just how it's done. And I know that a lot of podcasters have done that. And I know several podcasters who they offer what is it audio book services or adaption service. And Shane Jones does, and I know Kat Ward of Paranormal Heart, she's got like a thing going on where she does like audio book reading and stuff like this. and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and there's so many people that are out there that are doing it, and many like yourselves that are entrepreneurial that have the setup to
Mm-hmm.
to do it themselves. And I think I and just to bring it back to Michael Thompson, he had like a sort of a project going on with his local school where he because he pretty much when he started his career, the local school was pretty much at his back because that's where he started, was in the classroom as a student. And I think they did a program where they like adapted one of his, as a sort of like they adapted his one of his books to audio book. And
That's awesome.
that was an interesting thing. I don't know if you would be able to take advantage of the same circumstances. They probably might not allow it, but it with him, he was in a unique situation that he could do that. But the thing is that you know there are so many possibilities and directions and ways that you can do it now,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just it's so wonderful. But now it's like the time is, well, which one is best for me?
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you have a good idea of what you want regarding
Mm-hmm.
narration and specific voice actors to take on specific roles and to deal with that. So whatever it is, I hope it. I hope things line up with you for you to um, execute it.
I'd really like to. It's definitely been high on my list and sort of one of my goals for 2025 to at least get a book recorded, and then I'll see, like I said, if the sound quality is good enough um, to release it. But um, yeah, I've been listening to audiobooks lately. That's not something I used to do, but over the last year, I've listened to several, and they're if you get a good narrator, it's really enjoyable. It's when you're out on a walk or something, and you can just it's like you get to read and get exercise at the same time. It's terrific.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I need to look into myself. The Other than that, I think we've covered pretty much everything. This has been a really fantastic show. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me and to share some of your just a small sliver of your spooky adventures, and the majority of your writing prowess and everything that you've done with it since then. It's a remarkable story. Like I said when I reached out to you, I wanted specifically to talk to you about the more creator side of the high fantasy and your adventures in it.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we met on like spooky grounds, but it's thank you for taking that and having a more focused interview than what it is that's usually expected of you.
Well, I spent 25 years as a speech and debate coach. I can talk about pretty much anything. So, if you're my dance partner, you lead and I'll follow. So it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah. Go ahead and let the audience know where they can reach you.
Okay, so my website is www.jbcaine, that's JBCAINE.com. And there you can find links to all of my books. You can find links to several of the podcast interviews that I've been on. So I'll be putting this one up shortly, I'm sure. And I have a newsletter that I do monthly, which you can subscribe to. I do not spam your mailbox. You just kind of get one, maybe two, if there's a special event going on. You can also find our podcast at ufbpodcast.com. And we are available on Spotify, Audible, Amazon Music, and Apple Music, and soon to be YouTube. That's one of my goals upcoming, is to adapt everything to YouTube so that we can get some listeners there as well. But yes, that is the Unfreaking Believable podcast, and a shout out to my Unfreaking Believable co-host, Betsy Kulikowski and Jenny LeBranch.
Fantastic. And thank you to Shane Jones for having you on the show where we were able to meet for the first time.
Absolutely.
And definitely to all our mutuals that are definitely going to be catching in on this and really enjoying it and squeeing when they hear their names called. Like, oh, that's me. But again, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, if there was any like bit of advice that you would like to give, or anything that like, whether it's like a hokey, the cat on the wall hanging onto the branch, hang in there bit of advice that pushed you through to allow you to be the person that you are today. What is that catalyst?
Well, so that could get very deep and very meta very quickly. So I'll give one piece of advice to aspiring writers, and then I'll kind of give something a little more general. So to aspiring writers, a writer is the person that finishes the book and you cannot edit a blank page. So just write. You can fix it in post. And then more generally, I think I would just remember to all folks out there, you are stardust spinning through the universe. And so you should just recognize that literally every day we live is magical. And you can just embrace that, flow with it, and make what you want of it. If you can manifest yourself as a ball of stardust spinning through space, you can handle whatever else is being thrown at you.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much. And we'll wrap it up here. And this has been a rather fantastic show. And thank you for coming on. I look forward to reading your novels and seeing what else is out there. And if you're willing to come back, we could definitely talk some more and talk about maybe we'll just throw a couple jokes of like, what do you do with 3 kobolds in a trench coat and all that nonsense?
Oh, I'm going to have to work on that one. I'll come up with a real good answer. But thank you very much for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed it, Chris.
Thank you.